Meeting to order. There are 7 members present. Therefore, 5 affirmative votes are required to grant a variance or appeal. The board is authorized to grant or deny a variance by Part 3, Section 60 of the Englewood City Charter. Anyone aggrieved by a decision rendered by this board may appeal that decision to a court of record. However, such appeal must be made within 30 days of the board's decision. Variance is effective at the end of the appeal period. Building permits for construction associated with an approved variance will not be issued until the appeal period is ended. Building permits must be obtained and construction begun within 180 days of the variance's effective date. We'll introduce the case. The city will present overall information. The applicant will have a chance to add any additional information. Anyone present who wishes to speak for or against it will have a chance. We might have more questions for staff. Then we'll close the public hearing and the board will discuss and vote. Will you please take the roll, Ms. Fenton?
Present.
Here. Present. Here.
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 Present. We'll open the public hearing for case VAR2016-014. We have proof of posting and publication. I'll share that. Do you have an intro for us, Mr. Lott?
I do. I do. Jeremy Lott with the Community Development Department. As Chair Green said, this is case VAR2016-014. It's for 4975 South Galapago Street. And the variance is, the applicant is requesting a variance to encroach approximately 1 foot 9 inches into the required 5-foot setback for a detached garage. Which it's a variance to table 16-6-1.2 of the Englewood Municipal Code. You can see here there were 2 neighbor notifications submitted with the application, one to the north and one to the south. The one to the north was in favor of the application, and the one to the south was in opposition of it. Here's an aerial of the property. It's zoned R1A, much like the other properties surrounding it. Here's an overall site plan of the property. This is after the garage has been built, and I'll allude a little bit, or I'll touch on the background here in a second of the overall project. And then these are just elevations of the garage that were submitted with the application, the building application, or the building permit. For a little bit of the background, as you read in your staff report, the applicant constructed the garage into the setback. The foundation was poured. It was poured incorrectly. The applicant then called the Community Development Department, and at that time we determined that an administrative adjustment could be done based on the information that was provided and some measurements that were taken. So we told the applicant to proceed with construction of the garage. After the fact, when the garage was constructed, measurements were recalculated and whatnot, that the garage was actually 1 foot 9 inches into the setback instead of a foot. So an administrative adjustment will allow up to a foot into the 5-foot side setback. So, long story short, the variance came before you, the board, instead of for an administrative adjustment. That's all I have for the background and for the other information. If you have any questions.
So what was built was, they had to submit a plan before they poured the foundation.
Correct.
And the foundation was poured in the wrong place?
Correct.
Different than what had been submitted for the permit?
Correct.
And we don't have a copy of that site plan?
It's not in this, it's...
Right, that's the after.
Right.
Before.
I think I have a copy of it. If not here, I can run and go get one. I apologize. It's a very standard site plan. Initially, the applicant submitted for a 3-foot setback, and it was then returned with a correction of 5 feet on the plan. And I think there was some confusion there with the people pouring the foundation. But
part of what's confusing to me is there's some information that says it was poured wrong, but then there's information that says they needed it to be here because of how tight it would be for turning a second car in there. I mean, was it pushed? Do we have any knowledge of whether it was pushed into this wrong position to try and make it easier for the car to park, or that's just an after-the-fact justification?
I believe it's an after-the-fact justification for the variance.
So originally, they turned it in, and it was 3 foot setback.
Correct.
You guys corrected it to 5.
Correct.
And then it was poured, and they encroached, and you thought it was only 1 foot? And is that when? I'm fuzzy on that.
I didn't do those measurements, and I wasn't actually at work that day that it all happened.
But it was supposed to be a 5 foot setback?
Correct. And the R1A zone district is the only zone district in the city of Englewood that requires a 5 foot setback. All the other zone districts for garages require a 3 feet. So.
Okay, so.
Setback is at 5.
And then this 1 foot, when did that enter into?
So in administrative adjustments, staff, we can do administrative adjustments for various things. For side setbacks, if the side setback is 5 feet, we can do an adjustment up to 1 foot.
Right. So
to correct or mediate situations such
were
as
you,
this.
and maybe I'm not reading it correctly, but so I guess there wasn't an agreement saying you can go 1 foot in, and then they went 1.9.
Correct.
They went 1.9, and you said, well, an administrative is 1 foot.
Right, because I believe that initially we thought it was that we could do the administrative adjustment based on where it was poured.
Right.
Is there any record of this in writing, of the back and forth?
Do you want to help? Since sorry, I wasn't actually involved in that conversation, that process, but I think Harold and Audra, they were more involved with that conversation because I was actually out of town that day.
Okay. Ms. Fenton, I'll have to swear you in.
I do. My name is Harold Stitt, Senior Planner in the Department of Community Development. The situation we have is as Jeremy explained, a permit was submitted. The information on the site plan was in error. The applicant had included a 3 foot side yard setback when in fact it was required to be 5. That was corrected. The information went back to the contractor. At the time that the foundation and the floor was poured, we discovered that it was in fact not 5 feet but 3 feet. And that was based on measurements that were made in the field by information from the contractor as well as just visiting the site. After the garage was built, we went out and did additional measurements and determined that it was in fact encroaching further into that setback than we originally thought. Initially, we thought because of the administrative variance procedure in the code, we could reduce the setback by 1 foot. And we thought we were within that area initially. When we went out to measure to do the final zoning inspections, we discovered that in fact it was a greater encroachment into that setback. Hence, a variance is necessary. Or that's why we brought this case forward.
I still don't get how the 9-inch.
Well, the way the code is written, if you have...
I get that the administrative adjustment is up to 1 foot. What I don't get is how they were told to go ahead and move forward when it was really a foot and 9 inches into the setback rather than only 1 foot.
We didn't realize it was 1 foot 9 inches at the time.
There was some measurement done when it was decided that it could be an administrative adjustment, right?
Yes.
But nobody knows how that determined it was only 1 foot?
I wasn't out there to do the measurements, so I don't know exactly. The property line wasn't identified specifically as we have now on a survey. This document is from a survey that was done after the garage was built. So we have a definitive number for the encroachment in the setback. We didn't have that. So, when permits are issued, a survey is not required, just a site plan. And the dimensions were based on what we believe the site plan is.
But the permit wasn't issued saying that it could be beyond the 5-foot setback, right?
Correct.
Is there anything, did the city give them anything in writing that says that, well, we know you went past the allowed setback, we're going to do an administrative adjustment?
That was not in writing, but we did tell the applicant that we recognize that there was an error in the way the foundation was poured, and we believe it to be within the range of an administrative adjustment. And then when
this is just all verbal,
we have it written down in our tracket file, the electronic system we use to keep track of permit reviews.
That's internal. It wasn't provided to the applicant or the contractor in writing?
We called the contractor and informed him that, based on what we believe the measurements to be, it falls within the range of an administrative adjustment.
Any other questions for?
Well, and I guess that's where I get a little confused in all this, is I'm assuming that the contractor located the property line.
Based on the site plan.
The site plan, but when you go out and you build things, you're going to locate the property line if you're supposed to build 5 feet off that. So I guess where I get confused is he missed his mark by 1 foot 9 inches. Either knew it and didn't disclose it to you guys when you went out and measured, but the stumbling block I'm having is the city either was told it was only a foot or didn't circle their wagons to figure out exactly how much it was off and gave them the go-ahead. Because that's where it could have been caught.
Right. We don't, on a site plan, it's hard to determine where the property line is.
I understand that.
And in the field to match dimensions, it's...
No, I understand that, but I think some of this goes back to being on the contractor, that if he realizes he's off, he knows where the property line is. He could have easily measured that he was 1 foot 9 inches off.
When the city said, okay, we understand it's beyond the allowed setback, go ahead, was what was communicated that that go ahead is limited to a foot, or was it just widely said go ahead?
No, we thought it was within that allowable 1 foot difference.
So it was told to the contractor that if it's only a foot beyond, then go ahead.
Correct.
I have a question about the order of things. So was it poured before the discussion about the administrative 1 foot?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, it was already poured.
It was poured.
There was discussion of maybe it's not such a big deal because
It's only a foot.
it's only a foot and we can administratively approve that under our standards.
Correct.
And then it was determined that it was more than a foot.
Then they said go ahead. Then they finished the whole construction. Then they found out it was a 1.9 feet. But if what was told to the contractor was if it's only a foot beyond, then we can do an administrative adjustment, that's different than if they said, okay, it's beyond, we can do an administrative adjustment, go ahead, without a specific only if it's a foot beyond. So do we have proof that that's what was said, that if it's a foot as opposed to some arbitrary amount beyond, that there can be an administrative adjustment?
Yeah, we have in a file, we have the notes of the discussion with the contractor that the measurement falls within the range for granting an administrative adjustment. Therefore, you can proceed with the construction of the garage.
The measurement being a foot specifically, or up to a foot.
I don't know if that exact wording was in there or it's...
That could make a huge difference, I would think.
Well, the measurement we had was it was within that range, and I don't know if the notes specifically say 1 foot or it's eligible for a administrative variance.
But the city did a measurement and determined that it was less than or up to a foot?
It was based on a measurement that I believe that the contractor did. Yeah.
I'd like to see the notes, because it's not clear what the order of events is and what was said and what was documented. I mean,
Well-
the system that you have, can we get it? I mean, how hard is it for you to go get a copy of the notes of everything that happened?
The order of the events were the permit was applied for. There was an error in the site plan that was corrected. The information went back to the contractor. The foundation was poured, and then we were notified that by the contractor, I believe, that instead of 5 feet, it was at a 3 foot. I forget the exact measurement, but less than 5 feet. And based on that, we determined that it fell within the range for administrative adjustment.
And where did the responsibility lie as to whether it was within an administrative adjustment? The contractor being told that if it's up to a foot into the setback, then we can do an administrative adjustment? Or the city by saying, oh, well, wherever it's at, we'll do an administrative adjustment?
No, it was what we told the contractor, I believe, was that if it's within a foot, then it's eligible for a administrative adjustment.
And is there documentation for that?
I'm not sure what's in the file. We can go look. Maybe the contractor can explain a little more on the.
All right. We'll probably be coming back to you guys. What do you have, Mr. Lott? I mean, the discrepancy is post-pour, right? So that doesn't, as long as you're saying that, right, unless, is that going to help you?
No, I just wanted to make sure that it was corrected, that it was.
But you had asked for the original permit, so.
Right.
But what was approved?
But I
What
think
was
that-
actually approved?
I think if you give that to us, it becomes part of the record up here. So, I mean, I think
There is
that-
a way to do that. I mean, right, Ms. Fenton? Yeah, I know it's a pain, but there is a way to add new documents to the record, and we may need to. But I don't know that that's going to help, because as long as you're telling us that it wasn't approved with the wrong setback and that the problem happened after that, then that doesn't really make a difference. Right?
Yeah, I'm just.
Or do you
I mean-
want it, is it going to have, you're the architect or
I-
engineer.
I think it just goes to a little bit of how a mistake like this could be made, or if it was intentional, that possibly this is where they wanted the garage all along, so how to work the system to get the garage where it is.
So
That's the only
is what
thing
you
I'm-
have what they originally submitted, and then it shows that it was corrected and not approved until the change to put it within the setback?
Correct. There's a 3 on the original plan, and it's X'd out, and there's 5 circled when they resubmitted.
Is where it's poured exactly what they originally submitted, or is it less than that?
It is great. I would say it's
greater than.
it's greater because it's at 3.3 inches.
3.3 feet,
Sorry, 3.3 feet
rather than 3 feet.
rather than right at 3.
So is it shifted over on the other side to the same extent? I mean, the square footage is the same?
Square footage is the same.
Okay.
Say we wait till we
Yeah, that's-
bring them back up. All right. Any other questions at this point for staff? We will have another opportunity.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the unique physical conditions of the lot. It's saying that the staff report's saying there's a grade change throughout the lot, and I'm trying to understand how that creates a situation where the garage couldn't be located at the 5-foot setback. Is the slope sloping down towards the garage?
It's the slope of the property is from east to west.
Okay.
So from the front of the garage to the rear.
And the applicant may have more information on that too. Any other questions for staff at this point? Okay, thank you, guys. We may have more questions after. Will the applicant please come forward?
Jerry Kreisek. I'm with Republic Garages at 747 Sheridan Boulevard, Lakewood, 80214.
Thanks.
What happened when we got the permit approved, we got the elevation back, and we didn't pick up, we originally submitted for 3 foot. It was on a survey from our report, just like you see there. We had them come back after the garage was built to do this one that you see here now. And what ended up happening is I picked up an area that looked like a 2 where the arrow was, and they had the 5. I talked to my customer. I said, hey, they'll let us go 2 foot. And he said, no, I don't want to go 2. I want to go 3. We originally submitted it at 3. We ended up at 3.3. So we called for our inspections. We had it set. We called for inspections. One of the...
This is after the pour?
No, this is before the pour. This all happened before the pour. I didn't pick up the 5. I picked up it as a 2, and I said, we could do 2 foot. And he said, no, I don't want to do 2. I want 3 so I can at least service the garage and maintain it from side to side when he needed to paint it. So we set all the forms. We called for inspection. Bob, the inspector, came out. All he does is check for wire and steel. We call for a setback inspection, and if it doesn't happen, we don't know if Audra or whoever comes out on setbacks and stuff, but when we realized after it was poured, we didn't do it deliberately. I've been in this business 31 years. I don't plan to go out there and make my life miserable, let alone the boards. I just kind of set we called Audra, came out, met me out there at the job site. And I said, well, let's establish where it's at because we got a slab here and we can work with that still. We can make adjustments on this. That wasn't the issue. If we needed to bring it in a foot, then that would have been what it was. So she held I held the dummy end and went to the end of the garage. I said, run it to the fence because if you look on the bottom of the survey, it shows the fence is kind of almost right on the property line. So we measured from that point, and she says, let me go back to the office, talk to my people, and let them know what's going on. And she was making her notes out there, and then she said, I'll call you back. And she called me back. Might have been that afternoon or the next morning. I don't exactly remember. And she says, okay, we're gonna qualify for administrative variance. And she said, you can continue with the project. I said, oh, that's great. And that's kind of up until the final. Then they came out and did somebody came out when it was done to finally do a setback verification. They didn't do the setback verification before we poured. I've always told, people, the inspectors and stuff, you got to have these people come out ahead of time because we're just taking it for granted that if I measured 3 foot and I picked it up and it was my error, I admit it was my error. I'm not disputing that at all. I recognize something happened, and then that's when I call Audra out and said, hey, we got a problem here. And she was holding the one end of the tape, and I'm holding it at the end of the slab, and she's taking her measurements, and next thing I know, they said, we can qualify for administrative variance.
So if she had said at that point, you can only be up to a foot into the setback, what would you have done?
I could have probably moved that wall in because the way the monolithic slab is rotate on that 45-degree angle, I still had a stable area to put that south wall and just move my anchor bolts over. They could have dropped anchor bolts in there and I wouldn't have had a problem. So I was willing to do at that time, but when they kind of indicated that it was an administrative variance and we probably have no, we can continue on. We continued on, got our inspections. And then after the job was done, then all of a sudden somebody came out, did the setback verification, said, hey, this garage is more than a foot into it. And I'm like, well, we knew all this information when we started this. I mean, Audra had... Was
the difference that the property line wasn't the fence, or what was the difference in what you and Audra measured?
We picked it up, and when I told Byron, the homeowner, that we could do 2 foot, I said, well, we could do 3 if you want. He said, I'd rather do 3 foot. And I said, well, more is better than less, so we don't have to do the 2. We'll just do the 3, and when they come out there, they'll say, okay, it's just a 3-foot setback instead of a 2. I didn't pick up the 5. That was at the top of the page.
No, what I'm asking is the difference between when, so you've already poured.
Yes.
You've identified a problem, you contacted Audra came out, you and Audra measured, and somehow that measurement determined the city thought that was within a foot of the 5 foot, right?
I'm not sure of the number she wrote down, sir.
But what I'm wondering is, do you understand the difference between that measurement, how that was established, and how the final measurement was established? Is it because the property line is not the fence, and you guys measured from the fence, or do you know?
Well, she came out there. This all happened before right when we were applying for administrative variance. We had our report come back out with this document. So we saw it was on the fence, so we just kind of came over. We usually, if it's a 3-foot setback, we usually go 3'3" or 3'2", and just give us a little bit. We don't go right on the line with it. Same in the back property line. So I'm always a couple of inches wider than what it should be, just for if that's not exactly, if somebody challenges it and says, you 2'11". But it was set up at 3 foot originally. They denied it, put the 5 up there, but when they ran this arrow and it looked like a number 2, and to this day, I swear it's still a number 2. I looked at it at the office the other day, and I'm like, it's a 2, but it's my mistake on it. So I was willing to make whatever changes we needed to make that work. I didn't know too much about the administrative, the 1 foot. Then when I found out about it, we could have made it. That wouldn't have been nothing structural. I could put flashing on the bottom to hide it, to keep our water out of the garage and stuff.
All right, just so that, let me try and say exactly what happened. You submitted a plan with the 3 foot because you thought that was okay, that's what your customer wanted.
No, everything in Englewood was 3 foot.
Okay, right, so you thought that was normal.
Yes.
City came back and said, no, in this zone it's 5 foot, but you missed that when you poured. You poured it at 3.3 because you always give a little extra, and after that you realized there was a problem. You saw that the number was not what you had poured. You contacted the city came out, they measured it with you, said, okay, we're going to cover this with an administrative adjustment, go ahead and keep going. But at that point, if the city had said, no, you can only go up to a foot into it, you could have kept that existing pour and put your wall up at only a foot in.
When did you understand that it was actually a 5-foot setback?
When I had Audra come out. It must have been the day before.
But I thought you called Audra to come out because there was a problem.
Yeah, I realized that when I looked at it and with the homeowner, we were looking at it and he says, you sure this wasn't a 5-foot setback? And I said, no, it's 2 foot right here. And I pointed to it and he goes, well, there's a 5 up here. And when that happened, I said, well, let's get the city out here. And I said, let's not go any further until we get a decision made from the city.
And it didn't occur to you to call the city before to ask them? I called for a setback verification. You didn't call the city to ask about the 2 that you thought there was.
I did not. No. I didn't realize that at the time until Byron brought it to my attention. I said, well, let's stop the project here and just get somebody from the city out here and figure out what we need to do. And I was willing to do anything at the time. I was just going by what I was told, and we continued on and got our inspections as we were moving on with the project.
Any other questions for the applicant?
I'm going to ask a question about the grade on the lot. Is it moving from east to west that's causing a problem for the?
Right side Galapago, where the concrete driveway, it's level coming back. And as soon as it gets kind of where that wood deck is, it starts sloping down, and the difference from that grade elevation to the back there is probably about 3 foot, 3.5 feet grade elevation.
Okay.
So there's a big retaining wall. It's a concrete wall, part of our pour. It's on that back and comes up on the sides.
How is it, if it's an east-west slope, how is that pertinent to setback, which is north-south?
It's not. It was just something to put into the, it's hard to fill out that application when it's already done and the mistake is made. was not something that was deliberate. I was just trying to, say it makes it easier if the garage, it would make it easier for the garage to be over so he could drive in, because the width of the door, he have to swing off to the right where that 30.4 is to get the second car and then back out. It would make sense to go to the property line, but obviously I know we couldn't. I submitted it at 3, and obviously after the fact it's 5, and I'm at 3.3.
So you're accessing the garage from the east, the right on this drawing?
From Galapago.
As opposed from the alley?
Yes.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir. Is anyone present who wishes to speak in favor of this variance? Is anyone present who wishes to speak in opposition to it?
I do. My name is Michael Cousins. My address is 4985 South Galapago Street, Englewood, 80110.
So that's the house right next to the garage.
Immediately to the south.
Yeah.
I really just have a couple points to make. I had a conversation with Byron on this very topic over the fence.
Byron?
The owner.
The owner, okay.
We were discussing what the setbacks are, and we have a building on our property that's immediately to the south of that garage that was a pre-existing building before we even bought the house. That is close. I'm not even sure what our setback is. It's probably something in the range of 3 feet. And he was asking in relation to that, and we explained that that building was there before we ever moved into the place. And that I had thought that the setback was bigger than that, was to be the 5 feet. After that conversation, I subsequently went online and was able to look it up within about 30 minutes that is what the standard is for that area. It's the grade change and what they had to do in order to deal with their car movement back there. This garage it's big. It's really big, and it's very intrusive into the view out of our backyard. Our deck is very similar to theirs in that when you're sitting on the deck, you basically face off to the northwest. Excuse me. And now that view is predominantly this garage, and it's tall.
Well, technically, the garage in that zone can be up to 1,000 square feet, and this one's only 583 square feet. So the size of it is not a question related to our approval or denial of the variance.
I understand absolutely, completely. My only point is that it's the way that it's set on his property, because the floor of that garage compared to the floor of the building that we have back there, there's probably a 3.5 foot difference. So it sits considerably higher than our garage. The slope in our backyard is basically the same as theirs. So what happens is when you...
Is your garage the building that's just south of this new garage?
It's not a garage. It's essentially a work shed.
Okay.
It's a utility building that was...
It's on you can see it on the
Overhead.
photograph vaguely. It's in the packet.
It's basically a work shed. It's at some point, I believe a dog breeder lived in the house before us because it's got some kennels built off to one side of it. But it's essentially a glorified garden shack. So
you mentioned something about a concern about drainage.
It's due to the size of this thing and how big it is, and I guess these measurements are taken to the wall and not to the eave, to the edge of the eave. So it's, any weather that comes in and catches in there, it's...
there are requirements it has to fulfill for drainage, and that is going to be taken care of so that it drains properly.
I'm sure it will be. I'm sure it will be, and we haven't had any weather bad enough to see what...
Does it have gutters on it?
It does have gutters.
Okay.
It does have gutters. It's just, it's a very big wall space, basically, that towers over our building. And it's, depending on how the rain is blowing, who knows? I mean, it's close. It just feels tight. It's very, when you stand there and look at it, it's on top of you. It's just big. It's big. And I understand it's completely within its limits size-wise. I have no problem with that. But like I said, I was able to go online and look up what the setback was supposed to be within a half an hour. And, I don't understand how there could have been a mistake about that.
So your position is they should tear it down and move it over 1 foot 9 inches?
Well, I would love it to see it, especially if it's going to be as tall and as big as it is.
Or really 9 inches, because the city could have allowed for 1 foot.
I personally don't know exactly where the property line is. What I can tell you is that the wall of that building is 3 foot and 1/2 inch from the center line of the fence. I went and checked that myself.
Okay.
So I don't know exactly where the property line is. If the property line is, on my side of the fence and it's the edge of the cinder block, okay, then maybe it is 3 feet 3 inches. But from the center line of the fence, it is 3 foot and 1/2 inch. So.
All right. Do you have anything else to add?
I have a picture here, but I'm sure you all have seen it.
Yeah.
So.
Does anyone have any questions?
I guess I'd continue what you started. If the applicant were to move the garage to 1 foot 9, in reality, how much difference does that make to you in your life?
And really, it'd only be 9 inches if the city did the 1 foot adjustment.
Well, if it's only 9 inches, then it's not going to make any difference in what my view is.
And if it's 1 foot 9,
1 foot 9 inches, it's probably not going to make much of a difference either.
Okay.
Given how tall it is.
Because the height is within allowable too. So in essence, it sounds like it doesn't really make much difference. Well, the height of the structure is
within allowable, but it's also, I mean, when you take into consideration the grade difference, right. It's,
Yeah, but we're not able to consider that. We have to go by the building code, and the building code allows that height.
I understand.
So.
I understand.
I think we definitely understand your view issue. We're a little hamstrung on it's within, the size.
Because we have certain criteria we have to go by on approving.
I absolutely understand. And that, like I said, that setback, I was able to look it up
and that's a reasonable,
very short order.
That's a reasonable statement. If, I don't know what your background is, but if, a regular citizen can look up and figure out the setback in 30 minutes, then a contractor should be able to.
No, I said 30. I did
30 minutes. Okay.
Yeah, it was not difficult to do. So.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Do we have more questions for staff?
Yes, please.
Mr. Lott, or I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. Well, Mr. Stitt.
I'll make an attempt.
Okay.
I have a question on the drainage, because it does say after the site inspection, a community development and engineering. Are they the ones who identified this potential drainage issue that may be corrected as it's completed? Who identified this potential issue? Because as I'm reading it, someone from the city said this could be an issue.
I think what happened is the garage had one specific drainage inspection, and that passed. But then when the driveway was completed, there was an additional pipe, which I think it was from a different contractor than the applicant, and that's what is causing the issue. And I think there are a couple of remedies to that issue that can be solved.
Would that have still been brought up if this was 21 inches from the fence line or from the property line?
I think so. I believe so.
So what are those proposed solutions?
I think tying the two pipes together, because the way the drainage is right now, it goes. There's some gutters that come along. I believe the south and the north sides of the building, and they kind of wrap around and go back north toward the center of the property. There's another pipe that comes out of the driveway right here, where the apron ties into the actual driveway. That's not shown on this plan. That comes straight back and stops right here, and. And I believe, I'm not in the Public Works or Engineering Department, but I believe the codes say that drainage you can't just put drainage straight into other properties. You kind of have to let it go to your property and go from there.
Sure, but having that extra 9 inches to 21 inches could make an issue, could make, a difference. So is there anything from Community Development and Engineering signing off that the solution is acceptable?
There wasn't an official solution that came about. I think that the applicant wanted to deal with this process first, and then whatever the result of this, they were going to come up with an official solution to fix that problem.
So I can tell you that the basic, having been through this drainage, what they're looking for is and there's probably notes on the approval that says the drainage will be directed towards the alley. But here, like the same here as in my house, we don't have an alley. So what they're looking at is you directing it back to the back of the property, and that's all they're looking at. So I think probably originally the gutters off that wrapped around and went to the back were okay, but the apron perhaps didn't carry the water far enough back. And I'm just guessing because I've talked to these guys on my projects on what they look for.
My main issue is seeing the elevation and grade change. I mean, we all know water, 6 inches can make a difference. So if that 9 inches made a difference, it'd be interesting to know yes or no. That's not an issue.
Right. Well, I think the bigger issue, almost if you direct it back to the back, it's still going to go down gradient. There's not an alley for it to go down. So it's going to, in essence, go on someone's property.
As far as what I can tell from what's presented to us, that's a separate issue from what we're looking at, and they'll have to deal with it one way or another.
But if they built it correctly the first time,
then it might not have been as much of an issue, right? Sure.
And the last question: do you know the answer to Chair Green's question about how it was determined the first measurement done by Audra was different than the final measurement done when they called for final inspection?
I do not know that. I wasn't even in the country at that time. So I don't know if maybe the applicant, Jerry, can...
no, because we already asked him that.
Right, but...
and he didn't have an answer for that.
Okay. I apologize.
So your correction that we've talked about, does that have a 2 on it? Is that what was sent? Is there a 2?
Not that I saw, but so when you submitted a building permit, there are 2 copies, and they're not identical. They're identical when they're submitted, but
right.
Whoever stamps them out for approval and releasing them, they can write individual numbers on them, and so maybe the plans examiner wrote a number 2 different times and it turned out differently or something, or I don't know. I'm not 100% sure.
So we don't have a copy of this that has this alleged 2 on it?
I haven't seen it.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
I apologize if this was mentioned.
That's
I
okay.
must have missed it. What do you know about the 8-foot easement at the rear of the property?
It's in lieu of an alley being back there. The 8-foot easement is on both sides of both properties. This one and the one directly behind it, and it runs along the entire block for utilities and various other electricity, etc. So it functions like an alley, but there's no driving on it.
Oh, okay.
In terms of utilities, it functions like an alley.
Yeah, it's enclosed by the fence, so you don't notice it.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff?
The question I've got is about whether this is a self-imposed difficulty. Is the recommendation that this is something that was a miscommunication that caused this difficulty? That's really where I'm stumbling here and trying to understand what is in the staff report about this. where this difficulty came from.
I would say so. Through miscommunications and errors on both staff and the applicant. That's how we qualified it as the not self-imposed.
Any other questions? I think that's a good question, Mr. Taylor. Do you have anything else along those lines or anything?
I'm just curious because it did say 5 at the top of the permit. It said 2 apparently in a marking. I'm just wondering if that's where this difficulty is coming from. But if the permit did have the correction on it, then I'm struggling with whether or not that was something that could have been avoided.
Right. I think
this is discussion.
Yeah. All right. So any other questions for staff? All right. Thank you. I did realize I didn't ask if there was anyone else present who wished to speak in opposition. We've got the applicant requesting to come back up. We haven't closed the public hearing, so go ahead. If you've got something to add.
Question on the 2-foot and 5-foot. There was a line running from the bottom of that page where the garage is. When it went up, you had some in red and some in black. And we were picking up the red, and that's where that 2 looked. Because when we get a correction or somebody redlines it, when they redline it to us, we're looking for the red line. And the one line was red, and then it had, to me, a 2, and obviously it was, and then they had the 5 in black up at the top, and there was some confusion about that.
So the issue is that the 2 was actually a 5, but it looked like a 2?
No. The 2 was off where the arrow was, and it was in red. To me,
what did the 2 mean? Do you know?
I don't know. I picked it up as a setback because it was going to the corner of the garage.
I understand.
And then the black was at the top, number 5, and that's another part of my mistake on that. So I just wanted to clarify.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Is there a motion? Well, reopen the public hearing momentarily to hear another person speak in opposition. You have to come forward and be sworn in if that's what you're going to do. Go ahead.
David McTiernan, 4995 South Galapago, 2 houses over.
2 houses over.
To the south.
Okay.
And not much, I apologize, it's not much in the way of facts, but just an opinion that this probably could have been avoided and if it were handled a lot differently. There's an ethics and conduct type of thing that I think needs to be brought to light. I'm not sure that there were really any conversations between the 2 parties involved to try to reach an amenable conclusion.
2 parties being?
The 2 houses, the cousins at 4985 and Byron at 4975. I know them both. Have relationships with both of them. I don't really feel that Byron ever approached cousin away after the fact to say, hey, I'm really sorry this happened, but are you okay with it? I think that would have settled a lot of this. I also think that, and I don't know the exact wording, but I know from Maggie telling me her side about how the contractor came over to get her to sign the approval paperwork. Once again, it's only how she told me, but I felt it was a little strong-handed. He came over twice without Michael Cousins there to say, hey, the city made a mistake. sign this paperwork and we'll, just to make sure it's all good. So, once again, the ethics and the conduct, I don't know how much, and I don't know that you're going to move the building, but I think it would be nice if there were some consequences for how it was handled.
Sure, that's generally reasonable. Thank you, sir. So someone's raising their hand. I'm assuming this is someone who would just like to speak in favor of the variance. So please come forward and be sworn in.
My name is Hannah Brake, and I live at 4975 South Galapago Street, the property at question. And I didn't know when this would be a good time to bring this up or if it was even appropriate, but since our other neighbor made kind of a similar, he called it ethics, I don't know what to call it, just an emotional, neighborly, I don't know, something. It's not facts, but our friend Dave said that, you know, we should have taken our plans and talked to Maggie and Cuz, and we kind of feel the same way. We've been neighbors for 7 years, and we've shared baked goods and watched each other's houses and picked up, up each other's mail, and I've really enjoyed living next to them, and that's why we've started this building project, because isn't it horrible to move someplace and have a terrible neighbor, and we're like, we have great neighbors, let's build and stay here in Englewood. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at talking in front of people. But,
You're doing fine. You're doing great.
When we found out that they had a complaint, and we didn't find out until the project was completed, I did go over because our contractor gave us the paper that was just mentioned, and I asked Maggie if we could get together later after our kids had gone to sleep and talk about it, because we love living next to them. They've been good friends, She was very upset, and I understand, but it was kind of made clear to me in the way that she talked that they didn't have any interest in talking to us, and they're very angry. And so ever since I dropped off the paper, which you have their complaint paper, I'm not really sure what the date was, but I kind of feel like I need to avoid them and, not bother them or wave at them or talk to them or anything, because I don't want to aggravate the situation, and I don't know how to make it right. As far as our relationship, without completely tearing down our garage, which would be very costly, and I feel like damage is already done. Anyway, I'm sorry. This is not really facts, but I just wanted to kind of say that to everyone. We had no malicious intent. We were kind of naive at building and all this stuff, and if we knew that it would cause all these things, we would have taken all our plans over there before we even moved any dirt in our backyard, because we do really love these people. So.
Okay, thank you.
That's all. I'm sorry. It's not facts.
Thank you.
All right, the public hearing is closed. Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion that the case VAR2016-014 be granted a variance to encroach approximately 1 foot 9 inches into the required 5-foot setback for a detached garage.
Going with approximately.
To encroach 1 foot 9 inches.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seems like a pretty awful situation in general. And I think the city needs to have a more explicit process that's documented for suggesting that an administrative adjustment will be made in the future.
I mean, I understand that frustration, but at the same time, for someone that's worked in development, it's not uncommon to get markups back that you don't understand, and you make a phone call. I guess that's the thing I'm a little blown away by, is that he asked for 3, thought it was reduced to 2, but didn't bother to, was unclear even still on what the 2 means, and there's a 5, but didn't think of putting in a call just to get it figured out. It's, you know, I think if we had a better record of what happened in the field, that would help us out immensely.
That's what I'm saying, that I'm surprised that there's not a better record.
What criteria are you thinking that goes to the call confusion or the lack of call? I'm just.
Well, I mean, I think that's what caused it. The problem is that, you know, self-imposed, I think it comes into play, the conversation the city had with the contractor. I think that's where that comes into being, that it's not self-imposed.
Yeah, I feel like 4 is justifiable around that because they were told to go ahead. I have a hard time with number 1.
Yeah.
I don't see what's unique, or, I mean, if it wasn't already built, I don't see how we would justify this being in the place that it's been put.
Well, I mean, would it simply be that the unique physical condition, which is particular to the structure involved, is that it was generally given a go-ahead? I mean, does it?
I don't think that's physical.
What's that?
It's got to be, well, the building's physical.
Oh, that it was already built?
That it was, I mean, I guess that.
I think we have to take that out of our analysis. We have to look at this as if none of that has happened and just use the criteria.
You see any way to, does anyone have a valid reason to justify number 1?
Well, to me, that's the only justification, because it's, you know, but for it, if it wasn't built, they wouldn't be here. And it wouldn't be built if the city didn't say you're within the foot. You know, the other, you could make the argument that the contractor stated that everything else in Englewood is a 3 foot, and the R1, this is a 5.
No one's mentioning the challenging turning movements. Is that because we don't really think that's a legit reason?
I'm not sure I understood what you asked.
Well, what we have written under number 1 includes a unique situation exists whereby the more challenging turning movements with 3 foot as opposed to 5 foot.
Well, and the 8 foot comes into play in the reasoning in the back, but so I mean that could also be add to it, that there's.
I mean, to me, if it had been my house, or if I was going to do that, I probably would have come and asked for the variance to 3 feet because of the drive-in direction. Everything else in the neighborhood is that way already. So, you know, I think that's
because they have to go around the house.
Yeah. So I think that one is the most valid out of the physical condition question.
So if we can justify the first one with that's the unique physical condition.
Well, in that case, we could say, I mean, the house was built, you know, in 1954.
Right. So the setbacks were different.
Were 3 feet at that point.
Right. So they would have, if they'd have planned on putting the garage in at that point later, they would have been able to put it in.
Were they all 3 feet, or was that the 3 and 7 back in those days?
I'm just reading the first paragraph under background. It says the zoning ordinance of 1940 were 3 feet for accessory structures. The current standard for an accessory structure in the R1A are 5 feet on the sides and 3 feet in the rear.
So if when the house was built.
So, well, I'm taking that, is that proper? Okay, I didn't know where you were getting the 7 if you knew something.
from previous conversation.
Okay.
Previous zoning.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what it was, but I'll take it on face value from the staff that was what was in place at that time.
That does make a unique.
That would influence where the house is positioned.
Right, but what I'm saying is that would affect, when they built the house, if they knew that they could build a garage at 3 foot, then they'd have more room to be able to get back there, but then it changed before they built the garage, then that is a unique physical condition. I think 2 is pretty straightforward. I think 3 is straightforward, and I think 4 is based on the situation of the city's go-ahead.
I mean, 4, I mean, I'll be honest, I struggle a little bit with 4 just because it's a guy that's been doing this for a while, and he didn't check out the code. He didn't look. You have a neighbor that could find it. You have markup on the drawings where you don't necessarily understand that there's 2 numbers and you don't inquire into it. But I do think the thing that ultimately gets him off the hook is a conversation that whatever took place in the field with the city that we don't have any notes for.
And that the city admits to.
Yeah. But, I mean, I just...
I mean, to me, it's at the point where the city allowed them to go ahead and go on from the foundation up, it became the city's issue.
Right.
So at that point, it's no longer self-imposed.
Yeah.
Unless there was proof that the city said you can go up to a foot.
Right.
Which they
well, I mean,
said they
they
don't
either,
have.
to me, they either said, yeah, go ahead, or they said, go ahead if. And I haven't heard the if.
Right. No, I asked specifically, and they
Right.
don't say the if was there.
Right.
Well, I think no one knows. I mean, that's the problem, is that we don't have the notes.
So from what I've heard here, the time to have caught it was at foundation. After that, the city gave approval. It's really not self-imposed after that.
Any other discussion?
I mean, it's a little bit, I mean, I understand everyone's frustration with this, and this isn't really much of a discussion, but, I mean, it sounds like they're very good neighbors, everyone, and there was goodwill before, and that the garage is the size that theoretically it could only be moved 9 inches because they could get
Right.
a 1 foot administrative.
And it technically could have been almost twice as large.
Right. And I mean, I understand everyone's frustration, and I just hope that you guys can sit down over a glass of wine and just maybe get this behind you, because I think it's a good neighborhood. That's all I had to add. No discussion.
Let's vote. Voting's not working, Ms. Fenn.
I vote yes. I think as far as the first criterion, just the turning maneuver thing, I would probably have approved it if it would have been brought to us at that early point anyway. Second criterion is, I think it is consistent with the zone district. It's really not a very big difference between now and 1950s when it was built. Third criterion on the variance, not permanently impairing. I do not believe that. I think if it was really affecting anything else in the neighborhood, I'd probably vote differently. And the fourth criterion, I think after the foundation was poured, at that point the city said go ahead, so that became non-self-imposed at that point.
I voted yes for the reasons stated, and I would also add I really appreciate everybody who's spoken tonight has been very candid and open about what happened, and it sounds really unfortunate. I don't sense any bad motives by anybody, and yeah, I hope as a neighborhood you all can have that glass of wine.
I voted yes for the reasons stated.
I voted yes for the reasons stated. And
I voted yes for the reasons stated. Additionally, I note that that easement at the back of the property does present some difficulties added to the turning movement issues, as previously noted.
I voted yes for the reasons stated, but I would like to encourage staff to work with the parties and engineering to make sure that everyone's happy with a solution to the water runoff. I think that would help it go a long way, and also perhaps in the future staff to get, I guess a system in place to better protect themselves. Just because I feel like, again, a lot of this can be laid on the contractor, but then due to some miscommunication, the city took some responsibility.
I voted yes for the reasons stated by Mr. Friesen, and want to add for the first criterion that part of the unique condition is the fact that the house was built at a time that the side setback was 3 feet, and the possibility of the side setback for the potentially future built separate garage side setback was 3 feet at that time. The plan long range could have been to build the garage with more room for the cars to get by the house, therefore making it unique. And I also encourage the parties to work this out, as stated nicely by Mr. Finn. Obviously, care about each other and lived near each other for a long time, and it's a lot easier to live if you get along with your neighbors. Thanks, everyone. All right, we have is there a motion to approve the minutes from the meeting on 9/14/2014?
So moved.
Second? Is there a second?
I have a second, but also one.
Thank you. Just wanted to make sure. You may want to restate that.
What did I say?
Not 2014, it should be 2016. I know it reads 2014 on there.
Yeah, I guess I'm still thinking about all that. All right, so.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. So our motion is to approve the meetings from September 14th, 2016. We have a motion from Mr. Taylor and a second from Mr. Friesen. And we have an abstain from
One
Mr.
slight
Finn.
correction, if I could. My first name is spelled with one L. Just
Oh, thank you.
technicality.
Sorry.
It's not that other guy, that 2L word.
Yeah.
All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same. Mr. Finn
I
abstained.
abstained, although they're rockin' minutes. I cannot vote.
Is there a motion to approve the findings of fact from the same meeting?
So moved.
Is there a second?
second.
Thank you. All in favor, state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Mr. Finn abstains.
Findings of facts are also equally as good.
Hey.
You have anything else for us, Mr. Lott?
Yes. So there's a meeting next month, and it's there's a 75% requirement for a lot frontage in a certain zone district, and it's for a variance to that to reduce it. The building is
5% what?
Sorry, the building is supposed to be 75% of the width of the lot.
Oh, yeah, that one.
So there's a variance to that. But then
Has it been built?
no. And then there's also Planning and Zoning Commission is considering or discussing, or it's somewhere along the process, the ground floor commercial requirement that you've heard you've had several hearings about. They're discussing removing it or modifying it in some form or fashion. So I'm just letting you know that Audra asked me to let you know.
One of our favorite hits.
But she will, I don't know when the exact hearing date is, but I'm going to get with her and get her to forward you the information. So, for planning and zoning, in case any of you want to go speak
what's the
for it.
timing on that sort of thing?
I don't know. I think sooner than later.
I mean, if it passes through planning and zoning, then it goes to council, or?
Correct. Correct. Sorry.
A while. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
I'd like to know if, based on this experience, community development is changing the procedure or process for suggesting that an administrative adjustment will be made so that we don't have this happen again.
So typically we have a setback inspection that everybody calls in. A lot of times what happens, the contractors are told when they get their permit, before you pour your concrete and you set up your form board, as you're setting up your form boards, call your setback inspection in. A member of staff will come by and verify it. I believe in this case, the pad had already been poured, and then he called the setback inspection.
So he suggested it was different.
But yeah, and it happens pretty regularly that the concrete's already poured.
Are there
and then they call the
signed
setback.
off, like,
Well, I mean,
record of these approvals? And I mean, if someone, I mean, really the part that I am most concerned with is this post-pour inspection that happened where they were told they'd get an administrative adjustment, and there's no record of these measurements being made or how they were made and how they were different than the final measurements. How do we make sure that that never happens again?
yeah. Well, and you know, again, the contractor didn't call pre-pour, which he's supposed to. There's no really penalty for that for the most part, because what they do is they'll go out there and check, and it's within where it should be. Now, you know, this, yeah, I mean, the
Because I'm a contractor, I got to play, contractor advocate.
And oftentimes we have
there's some
new
good
houses.
contractors, but there's also games that are played.
Yeah.
And that's part of the problem with this is I think that.
Yeah, but he could have put the wall in the right spot had the city not said go ahead with the wrong spot.
Yeah, he would have had to pour more of the pad, and I mean.
It still wouldn't be a built garage.
No, absolutely.
All right. Anyway, I would like to know that what the documenting procedure is for suggesting that an administrative approval can be counted on or not in the future, so that we don't have this happen.
Well, I think maybe just have it in writing.
Yeah, even if
Maybe a statement of facts, why it's being granted. It doesn't have to be that complicated, but again,
I'm not suggesting it be complicated, but something.
Yeah.
right,
even
but
if it's just a conversation record that's just something written out that everyone can kind of agree to, even if it's in the field, it could be something that we could look at.
And there are even several places in our computer software system where you can add notes too. So you can do it under the inspection, you can do it under the entire permit, you can do it under another section.
And I would also request that if something like this happens again, that we get those notes as part of the record.
Okay.
Whatever notes of all communication back and forth with the applicant through the process of being told that they're going to have an administrative adjustment, whatever the city's notes are, should be part of the record.
Fair enough. I apologize.
Anything else for staff?
Mr. Stitz, nice to see that you are you're here in person. I've just seen your name before. Didn't know if you actually existed, but
Thank you for being here. That helped to have your input. Anything for us, Mr. Comer?
Nothing from the city attorney.
All right. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Thank you. All in favor?